a colossal 10-year siege, meddling, unpredictable gods, a brilliant, totally deceptive wooden horse. It plays out like a perfectly scripted movie, and pretty soon, it's going to be won again on the big screen. But before that happens, history isn't just about the past. It's the key to understanding the present and the future. Welcome to CivicLore, where history, politics, and society come together through cinematic storytelling. Today, we're doing a spoiler-free explainer to separate the historical facts of the Late Bronze Age from the legendary epic of Odysseus. Part 1. The ultimate cinematic epic.
So, the classic story goes like this. A massive alliance of Achaean Greeks waged a brutal 10-year war on the city of Troy around the 13th century BC. Why? Well, because a Trojan prince named Paris took Helen, the wife of the Spartan king. It's a story of vengeance, heroism, and survival. Basically, it's the ultimate template for epic cinema. But modern historians view this legend with deep, deep skepticism. Take the prominent historian Moses Finley. He flatly stated that the Trojan War should just be entirely removed from history and returned to myth and poetry. Which leads us directly to a really massive question. How much of this legendary epic actually happened? Was there a real Troy? Did a real Odysseus fight there? Or is it all just a beautifully crafted mirage? Part 2. The myth of the Trojan War.
To understand the facts, we have to look at how the story itself was actually formed. And you really need to notice the massive gap in time here. The supposed Trojan War happened around 1200 BCE, but Homer's epic poems, they weren't composed until the 8th century BCE. That is a staggering 400-year gap. Homer wrote the epic long after the actual Bronze Age collapse, relying entirely on a long, unwritten oral tradition. Later on, Greek tragedians and historians like Herodotus adapted and tried to contextualize it, but fundamentally, it was a centuries-long game of historical telephone. And through that long game of telephone, several key elements became firmly embedded in Western culture. We got the abduction of Helen, the devastating 10-year siege, and those incredibly dramatic set-piece duels between heroes like Achilles and Hector. We got gods intervening right on the battlefield. And of course, the giant wooden horse trick. These are the defining features of Homer's epic that completely shaped our view of Greek heroes.
But here's the thing. Even in antiquity, people had their doubts. Ancient Greek historians suspected that storytellers took massive creative liberties with the facts. Thucydides, writing in the 5th century BCE, applied a seriously skeptical lens to the legend. He suggested that, sure, an expedition likely occurred, but it was wildly exaggerated in its size and scope. He knew that poets prioritize a good story over a factual military report. So if the written accounts are totally embellished, where do we actually find the truth?
Part 3. Digging up the truth. For centuries, people assumed Troy was just a fairy tale. But then, a series of massive archaeological breakthroughs completely brought the real Mycenaean and Minoan worlds back to life. In the 1870s, a guy named Heinrich Schliemann, who was completely obsessed with Homer, began excavating a mound at Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey. In 1900, Arthur Evans uncovered the palace of Knossos on Crete. And in 1952, Michael Ventris finally cracked the code of Linear B, which was the actual written language of the Mycenaean Greeks. And you have to look at what they found. At Hisarlik, they didn't just find dirt. They found the fortified walls and fire-damaged buildings of an ancient city. Troy actually existed. Over in mainland Greece, at Mycenae, they discovered these incredible beehive tombs filled with brilliant gold masks and weapons. And at Pylos and Knossos, those Linear B clay tablets were uncovered. Suddenly, we had actual physical evidence proving that a heavily fortified city in Anatolia and a wealthy warrior aristocracy in Greece truly existed. But here is where the myth and the physical reality violently collide. Homer's vision presented this unified Greek empire, rallying together under a supreme high king to fight a giant foreign enemy. The archaeological reality, though, completely different. The ruins and records show a highly fragmented, fiercely competitive network of independent palace states. Places like Mycenae, Pylos, and Tiryns weren't a single unified nation. Not at all. They were fierce individual rivals. Part 4. The real Mycenaean world.
Take chariots, for example. In the myth, they're these glorious individual dueling platforms. Heroes ride in, jump off, hurl a spear, and win eternal glory. But the reality found on those deciphered clay tablets, the chariots were actually just tactical transport for heavily armored elites, and palace accountants obsessively tracked their broken wheels and storage in tedious bureaucratic logs. It wasn't about heroic glory on the battlefield. It was strictly about inventory management.
However,
we really shouldn't dismiss Homer completely because he did get some highly specific things right. Archaeologists found distinctive boar tusk helmets that were exact matches to descriptions in the Iliad. They found bronze swords and elaborate military equipment buried with the nobility. Plus, those linear B tablets reveal frequent communication and a brutal slave trade between Western Anatolia and the Mycenaeans. So that lends some factual weight to the pillaging described in the epic. The material culture of the poetry actually held these tiny, perfect fossils of real Bronze Age history.
And what about the war itself? Well, Hittite diplomatic records from the era mention a place called Wilusa, which scholars widely agree is Troy. These records, combined with the archaeology, suggest intense military tension between the Anatolian empires and Achaean Greece. Geographically, Troy sat right on crucial trade routes. It was likely a very real flashpoint between warring powers during a period of widespread political collapse, which absolutely led to a real historical conflict.
Part 5. The Power of the Myth.
So, if the Trojan War was likely just a trade route conflict fought by fractured states managing chariot inventories, why did the Greeks fictionalize their own past so dramatically? Why does this romanticized story still captivate us today? Well, scholars explain this using a really fascinating concept called the Homer meme. A meme, in the academic sense, is a cultural practice or story replicated and passed on using the human brain, completely without regard to literal historical accuracy. Over centuries of oral storytelling, cultural memories fossilized different eras into a single compelling epic. It survived not because it was a perfect historical record, but because it was an incredibly successful, sticky idea.
You have to remember, the ancient Greeks were deeply philosophical. They didn't view the story of Odysseus as a literal history textbook that needed rigorous fact-checking. They treated their own history and myths as mirrors. They used these epics as philosophical tools to explore human identity, the profound cruelty of war, and incredible human resilience. For them, the myth was a way to navigate the immense complexities of being human.
And that is really what you should take away from this. As you prepare to see this timeless story adapted by Christopher Nolan, ask yourself, will the film capture the harsh, fragmented reality of the late Bronze Age palace states, or will it lean completely into the enduring cinematic power of the Homer meme? Keep this historical reality in the back of your mind when you watch the film, and ask yourself how humanity continuously uses myth to preserve our identity long after the actual historical facts have faded to dust.